Welcome to the Must Reads interview series sponsored by the Perkins Center for Preaching Excellence. I'm Wes Allen, and I'm excited to have with me today our own Alyce McKenzie, who directs the center and who is the Levan Professor of Preaching and Worship. With her is our colleague from the wider Southern Methodist University community, Owen Lynch. Owen teaches corporate communication and public affairs, and one of his specializations is the use of humor in those areas. Doctors McKenzie and Lynch are with us today because they have co-authored the second volume in the center's Preaching and book series. The book is entitled Humor Us, Preaching and the Comic Spirit. Owen, Alyce, welcome to Must Reads. Alyce, I'm wondering if you would start us off by saying a word about what inspired you to choose this particular interdisciplinary topic for the series.
Well, I have always, as my father would say, enjoyed my own sense of humor. And I always thought of it as a kind of guilty pleasure. But as time has gone on, I have come to realize that humor is really a very powerful tool that can be used for good. And let's not demote it anymore to the opening joke, and let's regard it as a gift from God, and let's harness its power for the preaching of the gospel. So that conviction is really what has led me to want to explore the power of humor, as we have in the title to the book, or the subtitle to the book.
And Owen, I mean, so it makes sense that Alyce would be interested in humor and preaching, but why would a humorist be interested in preaching?
I think I study the human condition as a sociologist and someone who does social action research, and humor is something I've noticed in almost every social situation. Whenever two gather, there's a joke, and so in those jokes you see truth, you see building, you see common meanings, because you have to have two people agree on something to find humor in something. They have to have a co-understanding. So I've used humor in many contexts to understand complex social phenomena. I'm also somebody who does have a deep faith, and find that humor allows me to look at the world around me and find and recognize the common humanity, even in people I disagree with.
So you both sort of mentioned your own humor and jokes and all, but this is not a book about these are the jokes to tell in the pulpit. I was tempted to start off, there were three professors who walked into a bar or something like that, but this is really about more, and it's signaled by your subtitle, Preaching and the Comic Spirit. So you've got some concepts that span this whole book way beyond just telling a joke. So what is comic spirit, and what are some of the other sort of major concepts the book promotes? Alyce, why don't you start us off?
Sure. So in the introduction, we lay out terms, which is a good thing to do, and one is the comic vision, which is essentially the resurrection comes after the crucifixion. That we know that there is a positive, joyful, life-giving victory of life at the end of this story, and preaching is trying to put our lives in the context of that opening and closing. And so the comic vision is the ultimate conviction that life wins out over death. And then within that, in the context of that, is the comic spirit, which is the potential for openness and receptivity to the good gift of humor that God and joy that God has placed within our lives. And then maybe, Owen, you want to talk briefly about what humor orientation is, which is, how a person is currently utilizing the potential of that comic spirit.
Yeah, so I think preaching without love, joy, and faith is like Paul says it much better than I do. We all know this, but I think that humor is a way of accessing joy, love, and faith. And one of the ways we all do this is through our humor orientation. So human beings, humor is unique to us in the type of humor that humans use, and that we have the capacity to look at the world, stand outside of that world, look at the world, especially understanding complex paradoxes and incongruities, and find humor in that. We call that our humor orientation, right? And this is from Booth and Butterworth and lots of social science research on this. People have different levels of humor orientation, the ability to appreciate and use humor in social contexts and with each other in communicative forms. Some people are much better at it than others. and yet humor is a universal trait. So what we do know, though, is that humor can be developed, and humor can be encouraged, and humor can be practiced, and people can get better at it. I think it would be like a basis. It would be basis if we said, "Here's humor is really important, but either you're born with it or you're not." Right? Put the book down if you're not, I guess. No, it's an important part of who we are. Humor is something that once you turn it on and start to look for it, we talk about this later in the book with what we call the knack for knowing, that as you open up the world to humor and let it in, you'll start to recognize it and see it in more places and see more opportunities for its use to kind of sidestep the rigid world, the religion of just law, and look at also places where we could find joy and happiness and love at the complexity in the world in which we live. So,
yeah.
humor.
So this book does some of the conceptual kind of work of talking about comic spirit, comic vision, and it also does some practical work on how to help you with your humor orientation, especially in the pulpit. So how does the book sort of flow through those topics?
Right.
I don't need to say everything's in the book because we want people to go get it, but what,
Yeah,
sort of
right.
flow.
Right. Well, throughout the book is the thread that humor is something that deepens our relationship with one another and God and not cheapens it. So we do talk about different types of humor and how we're talking about humor used in a particular way. But within that, then the first part talks about the gift of the comic spirit, placing the gift of humor theologically as a gift from God, and that we are made in God's image. And so we have this gift, which is not a virtue in and of itself, but can foster love, hope, joy, and community. So that's part one. The second part then focuses on the sermon and the comic spirit. And we actually do look really practically. It's not a joke book, but I'm hoping people will laugh as they read it. But we do have a number of examples of how humor can be used very specifically in the opening, the closing, and lowering people's defenses, gathering group identity. And then finally is the preacher and the comic spirit, because I was very taken by this notion of the preacher as a comic figure, not in the way that we don't want it to be, but in the sense of someone who realizes they're on a group adventure rather than the lone savior of the congregation through the proclaimed word. So basic flow from gift to the comic spirit, the sermon and the comic spirit to the preacher and the comic spirit. So it's a fun adventure.
Oh, sorry, what?
I said it's a fun adventure.
It is a fun. I want to thank you for the book. I think it fills a gap in the homiletical literature. There's interest out there now in preaching and humor, and your book comes at that from a very different angle. I think it will help preachers better use the funny stuff of humor for the serious purpose of proclamation. So I want to thank you both for the book. I want to thank you for taking time to be interviewed with us. And everybody, the book is available on Amazon and other places. So go get a copy. So thank you both.
Thank you very much. I appreciate
Thank you,
you.
Wes.